If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The mansion stood imposingly in the heart of Belgravia, one of London's most aristocratic neighbourhoods. Its white walls gleamed under the afternoon sun, reflecting the light with an almost artificial purity. Behind the high walls and electronic gates, impeccable gardens formed labyrinths of green and flowers that never withered. Everything there seemed perfect. Everything there seemed controlled, and it was precisely this perfection that concealed the invisible cracks of a house that breathed silence. Inside that three-story residence with Italian marble floors and crystal chandeliers that cost more than an entire apartment, lived Michael Anderson, an 8-year-old boy whose brown eyes held a rare intelligence for his age. Michael was born with a condition that affected his mobility, making his movements slower and requiring the use of crutches or a wheelchair depending on the day. But his mind was quick, curious, full of questions about the world. He loved to read, draw, and imagine stories. And more than anything, he dreamed of going to school, a simple dream common for any child, but for him it represented the gateway to an entire universe. Edward Anderson, Michael's father, was a 42-year-old man, tall, with greying hair at his temples, always dressed in tailored suits. A real estate magnate, he spent most of his days between meetings, business lunches, and trips to other capitals. He loved his son deeply, of that there was no doubt, but Edward's love manifested in the form of material comfort, expensive treatments, renowned therapists, and imported toys. His presence, however, was scarce. He believed he was doing his best, ensuring Michael had everything. But everything, for a child, doesn't always mean what adults imagine. Michael's mother had left when the boy was just 2 years old. Not by deliberate choice, but due to circumstances Edward preferred not to revisit. Since then, the businessman had raised his son with the help of a team of professionals and the house's longest-serving employee, Mrs. Celia. Celia Peterson was 58 years old, with black hair with silver strands pulled back into a low bun, and hands calloused from years of caring for that house and that boy. She had been there since before Michael was born, had seen Edward's wedding, the baby's birth, the nights of crying, the first words. For Celia, Michael was not just a child under her care, he was almost a grandson. She knew every expression on that face, every tone of voice, every silence that meant fear, and every smile that hid sadness. In the last 6 months, however, something had changed in the dynamics of that house. Edward had begun a relationship with Melinda Roberts, a 35-year-old woman, slender, salon blonde, always impeccably dressed. Melinda worked as a marketing manager for a cosmetics company and possessed a rehearsed smile, the kind that charmed at dinners and social events. She entered Edward's life like a perfumed whirlwind, bringing lightness where before there had only been routine. At first, Melinda showed attentiveness to Michael. She brought gifts, asked about the school he so desired, and praised his drawings. Edward, charmed, interpreted this as a sign that he had finally found someone who could not only share his life, but also offer his son the maternal figure he so desperately needed. Within a few months, Melinda was practically living in the mansion, and the engagement was announced at a discreet but elegant party, flowing with French champagne and canapes served by uniformed waiters. Mrs. Celia, however, did not share Edward's enthusiasm. There was something in Melinda's eyes that bothered her, a coldness that emerged when no one else was looking, a disguised impatience when Michael asked for help, a tone of voice that changed completely as soon as Edward left the house. It was on a March afternoon when the London heat made the air shimmer above the asphalt that Celia began to notice the first truly worrying changes in Michael's behavior. The boy, who used to eagerly await snack time, began to refuse food. He said he wasn't hungry. He averted his gaze when Celia asked if everything was all right. His answers became monosyllabic. Yes, no, maybe. Michael had finally secured a spot at the school he so desired, a private institution in Chelsea, known for its accessibility and for inclusively welcoming children with special needs. Edward had paid a fortune for the enrollment and the necessary adjustments. Michael should have been radiant, but instead, he returned every day with a heavy backpack, an untouched lunchbox, and a silence that hurt more than any scream. One morning, Celia found Michael sitting in his room, looking out the window. He held a notebook against his chest, his eyes red as if he had cried, but without tears streaming down. She approached slowly, sitting beside him on the bed with blue sheets. "Michael, my dear, tell me what's happening," Celia asked, with the soft voice she had used since he was a baby. The boy gripped the notebook tighter. "Nothing, Celia, everything's fine." "No, it's not, my son. You're not eating. You're not smiling. Isn't school good?" Michael hesitated. He swallowed hard. "Yes, it is. It's nice." But his voice trembled. Celia reached out and gently touched the boy's shoulder. He flinched, as if that touch brought painful relief. "You can trust me, you know that, right?" Michael nodded but said nothing. Celia knew that insisting at that moment would be futile. Children have their own time to open up about wounds. She just stayed there, beside him, in silent solidarity, until Michael relaxed a little and leaned his head on her shoulder. That same afternoon, Melinda arrived home with shopping bags. She had come from lunch with friends and was in a good mood. She greeted Celia with a quick nod and went up to the room where Michael was doing his homework. Celia, who was organizing the pantry, heard Melinda's sweet voice echoing down the hallway. "Hi, my dear, how was school today?" "It was good," Michael replied softly. "Finished your homework?" "Not yet." "Then finish it quickly. Your father doesn't like laziness, you know." Celia frowned. There was nothing wrong with the words, but the tone was cutting, like a knife wrapped in silk. In the following days, Celia began to pay more attention. She noticed that whenever Melinda was alone with Michael, the boy became tense. He fidgeted nervously, bit his lip, and avoided looking directly at her. When Edward arrived, however, Melinda transformed. She became sweet, attentive, affectionate. She helped Michael with his homework, told jokes, asked about his day. Edward smiled, relieved, convinced that everything was going well. But Celia knew. She knew that boy like the back of her hand, and he was suffering. One night, while helping Michael get ready for bed, Celia noticed something strange. The boy's backpack was open in the corner of the room, and inside it, the lunchbox remained closed, untouched. Again. "Michael, you didn't eat anything at school again." He averted his gaze. "I wasn't hungry." "My son, you need to eat. You're getting thinner." "I know, Celia, but I can't." "Why?" Michael opened his mouth as if to speak, but then heard footsteps in the hallway. "Melinda." He immediately closed his mouth and looked back at the floor. Celia didn't insist, but the worry grew like a shadow within her. The following weekend, Edward had to travel to Edinburgh for an important meeting. He would be away for 3 days. Before leaving, he kissed Michael on the forehead, promised to bring a gift, and asked Melinda to take good care of his son. She smiled, full of rehearsed tenderness, and assured him that everything would be under control. As soon as Edward left, the atmosphere of the house changed. Celia noticed immediately. Melinda, who had previously feigned interest in Michael's activities, now barely disguised her irritation. When the boy asked for help with a math exercise, she sighed loudly and said he needed to learn to manage on his own. When he asked if they could play a game together, she replied that she was busy. When he tripped in the hallway and dropped a glass of juice, she exploded. "You don't pay attention to anything. Always knocking things over. Grow." "Hup, Michael?" The boy, frightened, apologized repeatedly as he tried to clean the floor with trembling hands. Celia, who had heard everything from the kitchen, quickly appeared with cloths and a serious expression. "Let me clean it," Celia said, looking directly at Melinda. Melinda returned the gaze coldly but said nothing. She simply turned and went up to her room. That night, Celia found Michael crying softly in the bathroom. He was trying to stifle his sobs with his hand, as if afraid of being heard. She entered, closed the door, and knelt beside him. "What did she do, Michael?" He shook his head. "Nothing, it was my fault. I'm clumsy." "It wasn't your fault, my dear. You're a child. Children knock things over, that's normal." "But she said I'm a burden, that no one can stand being near me." Celia felt her heart clench. "Who said that?" Michael didn't answer, but the silence confirmed everything. From that moment on, Celia began to document everything. She noted the times Michael ate, what he ate, when he cried, when he trembled. She started noticing other details. The lunchboxes always came back full. The notebooks had crumpled pages. The drawings showed large, menacing figures next to small shrunken ones. The school also began sending notes. Michael's teacher reported that he was becoming increasingly quiet, refused to participate in activities, and trembled during recess. In one of the notes, the pedagogical coordinator mentioned that Michael had fainted during physical education class. When asked, he said he hadn't had breakfast. Celia intercepted this note before it reached Melinda's hands. She knew that if Edward's fiancée saw it, she would distort everything. She kept the paper in a folder she hid at the back of her bedroom closet, along with all the other evidence she had been collecting. When Edward returned from his trip, Celia tried to talk to him. She waited until he was alone in his office, reviewing emails, and knocked on the door. "Mr. Anderson, may I speak with you for a minute?" "Of course, Celia, come in." She entered, nervous. She knew that what she was about to say could change everything, or it could be completely ignored. "It's about Michael," she began. "I'm worried about him." Edward looked up from his computer screen, frowning. "Worried? Why? He seems fine." "No, he's not, Mr. Anderson. He's not eating. He's thinner. He cries in secret. The school is sending notes saying he fainted." Edward seemed genuinely surprised. "Fainted? When?" "Last week, during physical education class." "And why didn't anyone tell me?" Celia hesitated. "I tried to tell you, but Melinda said I was overreacting, that Michael is too sensitive and that I'm spoiling him." Edward sighed, running his hand over his face. "Celia, you know I trust you. But Melinda is also trying to help. She has experience with children. She worked with social projects before." Celia didn't know this information. Melinda had never mentioned it, but she didn't want to argue. "Mr. Anderson, I've known this boy since he was born, and I'm telling you something is wrong." Edward looked at her for a long moment. Then he sighed again. "I'll talk to him. Thank you for letting me know." Celia left the office feeling minimally relieved but not convinced. She had known Edward for years. She knew he was a good man, but she also knew he had difficulty seeing problems that weren't wrapped in numbers and contracts. That night during dinner, Edward tried to talk to Michael. Melinda was sitting next to the boy, cutting his meat into small pieces, smiling as if everything was absolutely normal. "Michael, Celia told me you fainted at school. Is that true?" Michael glanced quickly at Melinda before answering. "It was nothing, Dad. I just felt dizzy." "Why did you feel dizzy?" "I don't know. I guess I ran too much," Melinda interjected in a sweet voice. "He gets nervous sometimes, darling. You know how children are." The teacher exaggerated a bit in the note. Edward seemed to accept the explanation. "Michael, you need to eat breakfast before going to school and take the lunch Celia prepares." "I do, Dad." "But you don't eat it," Edward added with a slightly reproving tone. "You need to eat, son. You're getting too thin." Michael lowered his head. "Sorry, Dad." "You don't need to apologize. You just need to take better care of yourself." Melinda smiled and stroked Michael's hair. "He'll get better, won't he, darling? Promise your father." Michael murmured an almost inaudible, "I promise." Celia, who was observing everything from the kitchen doorway, felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something profoundly wrong with that scene, in the way Melinda controlled every word, every gesture, every response, in the way Michael recoiled whenever she touched him. After dinner, when Edward went upstairs to shower and Melinda went to answer a call, Celia took the opportunity to talk quickly with Michael. "You're afraid of her, aren't you?" Michael's eyes widened, scared. "Don't say that, Celia, please." "Why can't I say that?" "Because she said if I tell my father anything, she'll leave. And then my father will be sad again, like he was when my mother left." Celia felt tears sting her eyes. "My son, your father would rather have you happy than have her here." Michael shook his head. "No, Celia. He likes her, and I don't want to ruin that. I just need to try harder, be less annoying, less clumsy. "You're not annoying, Michael. You're not clumsy. You're a wonderful child." But Michael no longer believed that. Celia could see it in his eyes. Melinda was planting seeds of doubt, guilt, and shame. And those seeds were growing too fast. That night, Celia couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small room at the back of the house, thinking about everything she had witnessed. She knew she needed to act, but how? Edward didn't believe her. Melinda was too clever to leave obvious traces, and Michael was being silenced by his own fear of destroying his father's happiness. She got up, went to the closet, and took out the folder where she kept the evidence. School notes, photographed lunchboxes, notes about the times of crying spells, Michael's drawings showing threatening figures. It wasn't much, but it was something. Celia knew she needed help. Someone Edward respected. Someone who had the authority to make him see the truth. And then she remembered Dr. Henry Carter. Michael's pediatrician since birth, the doctor had closely followed the boy's development. He was a serious ethical man who wasn't afraid to speak difficult truths. If anyone could make Edward listen, it was him. The next morning, Celia called Dr. Henry's office and scheduled an urgent meeting. She didn't mention the subject over the phone, only saying it was about Michael and that it was important. Meanwhile, at the Belgravia mansion, the cycle continued. Michael woke up, tried to eat something, went to school carrying the invisible weight of fear, returned in silence and hid in his room. Melinda maintained her impeccable performance when Edward was present and let the mask drop when he left, and Celia observed everything, noted everything, piecing together a grim puzzle that still needed to be assembled before the eyes of those who refused to see. The rain began to fall over London that afternoon, washing the streets, filling the gutters, bringing temporary coolness to the city that never stopped. Inside the White Mansion, however, the heat of silence remained suffocating, and Michael, sitting by his bedroom window, watched the drops slide down the glass, wishing they could also wash away the sadness he carried within his chest. Celia knew that time was running out, that with each passing day, Michael sank a little deeper, and that if she didn't act soon, it might be too late to save the boy she loved, as if he were her own blood. The meeting with Dr. Henry was scheduled for 2 days later. Celia prayed that there was still time, that a doctor's words would carry the weight that hers did not, that Edward would finally wake up and see what was happening right under his marble and crystal ceiling, because in the end, that house was not a home. It was a golden prison. And Michael was paying too high a price for the illusion of perfection that the surrounding adults insisted on maintaining. Dr. Henry Carter's office was in a commercial building on Oxford Street, surrounded by the frantic movement of executives, students, and street vendors. Celia arrived promptly at 9 in the morning, nervous, holding against her chest the folder with all the evidence she had collected in recent weeks. The receptionist, a young woman with curly hair, smiled upon seeing her and indicated that she could go straight in. The doctor received her standing, with a firm handshake and a concerned look. Henry was about 50 years old, with a neatly trimmed grey beard, discreet framed glasses, and a presence that inspired confidence. He had known Michael since birth and had closely followed all the challenges the boy's condition imposed. "Mrs. Celia, please sit down. On the phone you sounded quite distressed. What's happening with Michael?" Celia sat in the upholstered chair and took a deep breath before beginning. "Doctor, I don't know what to do anymore. Michael is suffering. He's getting thinner and thinner. He doesn't eat. He cries in secret. He trembles. The school is sending notes saying he fainted. That he's not eating, that he's withdrawn, and I know why." Henry leaned forward, attentive. "Go on." "It's Melinda, Mr. Anderson's fiancée. She mistreats the boy when his father isn't around. She doesn't hit him, she doesn't yell loudly, but she does worse. She humiliates, threatens, takes away food, makes him feel guilty for everything. And the worst part is that Michael doesn't tell his father anything, because he's afraid she'll leave, and Edward will be sad." The doctor frowned, worried. "Do you have proof of this?" Celia opened the folder and began taking out the papers. "I have the school notes. I have photos of the lunchboxes that come back full every day. I have notes of when he cries, when he trembles. I have drawings he made where large figures appear threatening small figures. Henry took the documents and began to examine them one by one, his expression growing darker. These were not just signs of childhood sadness, they were clear evidence of systematic emotional abuse. And Edward, does he know all this? I tried to tell him, Doctor, but he doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm exaggerating, that I'm jealous of Melinda. She's very clever. In front of him, she acts like the best person in the world, sweet, attentive, affectionate. But when he leaves, she turns into someone else. Henry took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. This is serious, Mrs. Celia. Very serious. Psychological abuse in children can cause profound trauma, especially in a child like Michael, who already deals with so many challenges. I know, Doctor. That's why I came to you. Mr. Anderson respects you. If you speak to him, maybe he'll listen. The doctor nodded slowly. I'll do more than that. I'll schedule an appointment with Michael this week. I'll assess him personally. If I find signs of abuse, I will confront Edward directly. Celia felt a momentary relief flood her chest. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you so much. You don't need to thank me. It's my duty as a doctor and as someone who cares about that boy. But Mrs. Celia, you need to continue documenting everything. Note dates, times, what she says, what Michael replies. The more information we have, the better. You can count on me, Doctor. I will continue. When Celia left the office, the sun was already shining brightly over Oxford Street. She returned home, with renewed hope, but also with growing anxiety. She knew Melinda was dangerous precisely because she was intelligent. If she realized she was being investigated, she could intensify her attacks, or worse, manipulate the situation to appear as the victim. Back at the mansion, Celia found Michael alone in the living room, trying to do his homework. He was pale, his eyes sunken, his hands trembling slightly as he held the pencil. Melinda had gone out for lunch with friends, and Edward was in his office taking calls. Celia sat beside the boy and placed her hand over his, stopping the tremor. Michael, you're going to the doctor this week. Dr. Henry wants to see you. The boy's eyes widened, scared. Why? Did I do something wrong? No, my dear. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just a routine checkup. He wants to see how you are. But Michael didn't seem convinced. Celia could see the fear growing in his eyes. Did he know somehow that things were about to change? That night during dinner, Melinda was strangely quiet. She ate slowly, observing Michael with a look Celia couldn't decipher. There was something calculating in that silence, as if she was planning her next move. After everyone had retired, Celia went to Michael's room to help him get ready for bed. He was sitting on the bed, hugging a worn teddy bear he had received from his mother before she left. Celia, can I ask you something? Of course, my dear, anything you want. Do you think my mother left because of me? Celia felt her heart clench. Never, Michael, never. Your mother loved you very much. She didn't leave because of you. But Melinda said that... Said what? Michael hesitated. She said that people leave when someone is too difficult to care for, that I cause a lot of trouble. That's why my mother left, and that's why my father has to work so hard. Celia felt anger rise in her throat like hot lava. She took a deep breath, trying to control herself. Michael, look at me. Your mother didn't leave because you're trouble, and your father works because he loves his job, not because you're difficult. You are a wonderful, affectionate, intelligent child, and anyone who says otherwise is lying. But what if she's right? What if I really am a burden? You are not a burden, and Melinda is wrong. Michael said nothing more, but Celia could see that Melinda's words had taken deep root. Undoing that kind of damage would take time. A lot of time. 2 days later, on Thursday morning, Celia took Michael to Dr. Henry's office. Edward was travelling again, this time to Manchester, and Melinda had stayed home claiming she had an important online meeting. In the consultation room, Dr. Henry carefully examined Michael. He measured his height, weight, and blood pressure. He asked questions about school, about how he was sleeping, about his appetite. Michael answered everything mechanically in a low voice, avoiding eye contact. Michael, are you eating well at school? the doctor asked in a gentle tone. More or less. Why more or less? Sometimes I'm not hungry. And at home? Do you eat at home? Michael hesitated. A little. What did you eat for breakfast yesterday? Silence. Michael? I didn't eat breakfast. Why? Because I forgot. Henry looked at Celia, who was sitting in a corner of the room. She shook her head slightly, indicating that Michael was lying. The doctor then changed his approach. Michael, I've been your friend for a long time, haven't I? Since you were a tiny baby. Yes, doctor. And friends trust each other, right? Right. Then I need you to trust me now and tell me the truth. Is someone stopping you from eating? Michael froze. His eyes filled with tears. He opened his mouth but couldn't speak. The words seemed stuck in his throat. Henry knelt in front of the boy, meeting his eyes. You won't get into trouble if you tell me. I promise. It was then that Michael broke down. Tears began to stream, silent at first, then in loud, desperate sobs. Celia got up and went to him, hugging him as the boy trembled. She said if I tell anything, my father will be sad. She said I ruin everything, that no one can stand being near me, that I'm too difficult. That's why my mother left. And she said, if I don't stop embarrassing her at school, she'll take away my food for a whole week. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain his own emotion. When he opened them again, there was determination in his gaze. Michael, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. None of that is true. None of it. You are not difficult. You don't ruin anything. Your mother didn't leave because of you. And no one, absolutely no one, has the right to take food away from you. That is wrong. Very wrong. But my father likes her. Your father likes you much more. And he needs to know what's happening. No, doctor. Please don't tell him. He'll fight with her and she'll leave and... Michael, your father needs to know. Not to make her leave, but to protect you. Because protecting you is his job as a father. The boy continued crying, but Henry and Celia knew there was no turning back. The truth had been spoken. Now it was time to act. After the consultation, Henry asked to speak with Celia privately. Michael stayed in the waiting room, flipping through a children's magazine without really seeing it. Mrs. Celia, this is worse than I imagined. This boy is in acute distress. The weight loss, food insecurity, tremors, all these are clear signs of chronic stress caused by psychological abuse. I know, doctor. I try to protect him, but I can't be with him all the time. You're doing what you can, but now we need to involve Edward. I'll call him today and ask for an urgent meeting, and I'll be very clear about what's happening. Will he believe it? Henry sighed. I hope so, because if he doesn't believe it, I'll have to take more drastic measures. What kind of measures? The doctor looked at Celia seriously. If I determine that a child is at risk and the responsible party does not act, I have a legal obligation to contact Child Protective Services. I don't want to reach that point, but if necessary, I will. Celia nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. What was once just a concern was now a formal case of abuse, and things were about to spiral out of control. When they returned home, Melinda was in the living room, fiddling with her phone. She looked up as she saw them enter and smiled. So, how was the appointment? It was fine, Celia replied dryly. Melinda raised an eyebrow. That's it? Fine? That's it. Edward's fiancée looked at Michael, who kept his head down. Did you tell the doctor you're not eating properly? Michael didn't answer. Melinda sighed dramatically. This boy is so stubborn he doesn't eat. At home he doesn't eat at school and then he gets weak. But there's no point talking, he doesn't listen. Celia clenched her fists, but controlled herself. She knew that reacting at that moment would be useless. Melinda was planting her version of the story, preparing the ground in case she was confronted. That night, Dr. Henry called Edward. The conversation was brief, but direct. The doctor said he urgently needed to talk about Michael, that he had found worrying signs, and that it was essential for Edward to return to London as soon as possible. Edward, who was dining, alone in his hotel in Manchester, was alarmed. What happened? Is Michael sick? It's not an illness, Edward, but it's serious. Very serious. I need to speak with you in person. Henry, at least tell me if it's something serious. It is. It's serious. but I prefer to explain it in person. Edward booked the first flight back for the next day. He cancelled meetings, apologized to clients, and prepared to face something he didn't yet fully comprehend. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Melinda sensed that something was different. Celia avoided talking to her. Michael was even quieter than usual, and there was a tension in the air that she couldn't identify. That night, after Michael fell asleep, Melinda went up to Celia's room. She knocked gently on the door. "Celia, can we talk?" The employee opened the door, but did not invite Melinda in. "What do you want?" "I just wanted to understand why you're being so strange with me. Did I do something to offend you?" Celia looked directly into her eyes. "You know very well what you did." Melinda blinked, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Michael, about what you do to him when Edward isn't around." Melinda's expression subtly changed. Her smile faded, her eyes grew cold. "Celia, you're delusional. I take excellent care of that boy. I do everything for him. You mistreat him, take away food, humiliate, threaten." Melinda took a step back as if she had been assaulted. "This is a very serious accusation, and a lie. I never did any of that. I have proof." "Proof?" Melinda's gaze hardened even more. "What kind of proof?" "You'll find that out soon." Melinda was silent for a moment, assessing the situation. Then she smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "Celia, I think you're confused or jealous. Edward doesn't need just you to take care of Michael anymore. He has me now. And I know that bothers you. It's not about me. It's about the child you're destroying. You have no proof of anything. And when Edward finds out you're making up lies about me, he'll fire you." "Maybe. But at least I'll know I tried to save that boy." Melinda turned and went down the stairs, but Celia could see by the stiffness of her shoulders that she was nervous. The mask had cracked, and now it was only a matter of time until everything came to light. The next morning, Edward arrived home around 10 o'clock. He was tired, worried, trying to understand what could be so serious. Melinda greeted him with a kiss and fresh coffee, trying to maintain normality. Dr. Henry arrived at noon. They sat in the office, just the two men, and the doctor began to explain everything. He showed the evidence Celia had collected, reported what Michael had said in the consultation, and explained the signs of emotional abuse he had identified. Edward listened to everything in growing silence. At first, he shook, his head incredulous. Then he turned pale. Finally, he exploded. "This doesn't make sense. Melinda loves Michael. She takes care of him." "Edward, I know it's hard to accept, but Michael himself confirmed everything. He's terrified. He's starving. He's being emotionally manipulated. This is abuse, severe psychological abuse. But she's so affectionate with him when I'm around." "Exactly. Abusers are often extremely skilled at maintaining two faces, one public, perfect, another private, cruel." Edward got up, pacing back and forth across the office. "I can't believe this. I can't." Henry also stood up and placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You need to believe it, because if you don't, you'll lose your son." Those words hit Edward like a punch. He stopped pacing and looked at the doctor with eyes full of suppressed tears. "What do I do?" "First, you confront her, but not alone, with witnesses. And then you make a decision. Either you protect your son, or you continue living in this illusion." Edward knew there was no longer a choice. The truth was before him, naked and painful, and he needed to face it, even if it meant destroying the perfect image he had built in recent months. That night would be decisive. The confrontation was imminent, and no one would emerge unscathed. Dusk fell over London when Edward decided he could no longer wait. After his conversation with Dr. Henry, he spent hours locked in his office, mentally reviewing every interaction he had had with Melinda and Michael in recent months. Her every smile, his son's every silence, every excuse he himself had invented not to see the obvious. Guilt began to weigh like molten lead in his chest. Celia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Edward called her. The employee dried her hands on her apron and went to the office, where she found him sitting behind the desk, his head in his hands. "Celia, I need your help," he said, his voice hoarse. "What do you need, Mr. Anderson?" "I need all the proof you have. Everything. Every note, every photo, every annotation. Dr. Henry showed me some things, but I know you have more." Celia nodded, left, and returned minutes later with the folder she had been keeping for weeks. Edward opened it and began to examine each document. With each page, his expression grew darker. The school notes, reporting hunger, tremors, and fainting. The photos of the untouched lunchboxes. Michael's drawings showing threatening figures. Celia's detailed notes on the times of crying spells. The days the boy refused food. The drastic changes in behavior. There was also something Dr. Henry hadn't seen. Pages from a notebook Celia had found in the trash, in Melinda's handwriting. They were cold, calculated notes on how to manipulate teachers' perceptions, how to make Michael seem dramatic, how to convince Edward that everything was fine. They were strategies as if it were a game. Edward read everything with trembling hands. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked at Celia with red eyes. "Why didn't I see? How could I have been so blind?" "You wanted to believe everything was fine. Sometimes we see what we want to see." "But I abandoned my son. I let him suffer while I—" "You didn't know, Mr. Anderson. She's very good at hiding." "That doesn't absolve me, Celia. I am his father. My duty was to protect, and I failed." Celia approached and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Now you know. And now you can do the right thing." Edward took a deep breath, trying to gather his strength. "Tonight after dinner I'm going to confront her. You and Dr. Henry will be present. I want witnesses. I want everything to be clear. And Michael? Michael cannot be present. I don't want to expose him to more tension. Can you leave him in his room with an activity he enjoys?" "Yes, I can." Celia left the office, and Edward was left alone with his thoughts. He looked out the window, watching the sun set over the buildings of London, painting the sky orange and pink. That would be one of the most difficult nights of his life, but it was necessary. Melinda arrived home around 7 in the evening, coming from a beauty salon. She was radiant, with freshly brushed hair, manicured nails, and a wide smile. She greeted Edward with a prolonged kiss and asked how his day had been. "It was productive," he replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. "We need to talk after dinner." "Talk? About what?" "About some important things." Melinda raised an eyebrow, but didn't insist. "All right. I'll go change and be right down." During dinner, the tension was palpable. Edward barely touched his food. Celia served in silence, observing every movement. Michael was in his room as agreed, watching a movie Celia had put on to distract him. Melinda, on the other hand, seemed unconcerned. She talked about her day, about a friend who was pregnant, about a sale at the clothing store. Edward merely nodded, not really listening. When they finished, Edward said, "Let's go to the living room. Dr. Henry is arriving." "The doctor? Did something happen to Michael?" "Yes, something happened." Melinda's expression changed subtly. A flicker of concern crossed her face, but she quickly recomposed her smile. "Of course, darling. Let's go." Minutes later, Dr. Henry arrived. He went straight to the living room, where Edward, Melinda, and Celia were already seated. The doctor greeted everyone with a nod and sat in an armchair facing Melinda. "Well, let's begin," Edward said, his voice firm despite his nervousness. "Melinda, I need to ask you some questions." She smiled, crossing her legs elegantly. "Of course, darling. You can ask." "How would you describe your relationship with Michael?" Melinda blinked, surprised by the formality of the question. "Well, I'd say it's great. I care about him very much. I try to take care of him in the best possible way." "And do you think he's doing well, emotionally, physically?" "I think so. I mean, he's a sensitive child, like any child with special needs. But he's improving." "Improving?" Dr. Henry interjected. "Melinda, I examined Michael yesterday. He's underweight, shows signs of acute stress, food insecurity, and tremors. This isn't improvement. It's deterioration." Melinda looked at the doctor with a rehearsed expression of surprise. "Doctor, with all due respect, Michael has always been thin, and the tremors are part of his condition." "They are not," Henry retorted. The tremors he exhibits now are emotional in nature, not neurological. They are caused by fear and anxiety. Fear, anxiety, but fear of what? Of you, Edward replied, looking directly into her eyes. The silence that followed was heavy. Melinda was paralyzed for an instant, then let out a short, nervous laugh. Edward, what are you talking about? Michael is afraid of me. That's ridiculous. It's true, Celia interjected. He's afraid of you, afraid of being punished, of going hungry, of being humiliated. Melinda turned to Celia, her eyes flashing. I knew it. You're making up lies about me because you're jealous, because you can't accept that. I've entered Edward's and Michael's lives. They're not lies, Edward said, standing up. I have proof, plenty of proof. He went to the side table and picked up the folder Celia had prepared. He opened it and began taking out the documents, one by one, placing them on the coffee table in front of Melinda. School notes reporting that Michael fainted from hunger. Photos of the lunch boxes that come back full every day. Celia's notes on when he cries, when he trembles, when he refuses food. His drawings showing threatening figures, and Edward took out the notebook pages with Melinda's handwriting. Strategies you wrote, about how to manipulate the teachers, how to make my son seem dramatic, how to convince me that everything is fine. Melinda looked at the papers and blanched. Where did you get that? You threw it in the trash, but Celia found it. Melinda stood up abruptly. This is an invasion of privacy. You have no right to rummage through my things. I have every right when it comes to my son's safety. You're believing her, Melinda pointed at Celia. An employee who is clearly trying to sabotage me. I'm believing my son, Edward corrected, his voice trembling with contained emotion. Michael told me everything. He told Dr. Henry about the threats, about the food deprivation, about being humiliated, about being afraid to exist. Melinda took a step back, as if she had been pushed. He's lying. Children lie, Edward, you know that. My son doesn't lie, Edward retorted firmly. And even if he did lie, the physical signs don't lie. The weight loss doesn't lie. The fear in his eyes doesn't lie. Melinda looked around, realizing she was cornered. She tried to change tactics. Edward, I know I was sometimes tough with Michael, but it was because I wanted him to grow up strong, independent. It wasn't out of malice. Taking food from a child is not being tough, Dr. Henry said in a firm voice. It's abuse. Humiliating a child is not education, it's psychological violence, and threatening a child to make them silent is not care, it's manipulation. Melinda turned to Edward, her eyes beginning to fill with tears. Edward, please. You know me. You know I would never do anything to hurt Michael. I love you both. If you loved him, you wouldn't have done what you did. Edward replied, his voice breaking. If you loved him, you would have cared for him, protected him, made him feel safe. You wouldn't have turned my house into an emotional prison. Melinda realized that tears weren't working. Then the mask dropped completely. Her face hardened, her eyes grew cold. You'll regret this, Edward. I could have been good for you. I could have been good for that boy. But you didn't know how to appreciate it. Get out of my house, Edward said, pointing to the door. You can't just throw me out like this. Yes, I can, and Sam, get your things and leave. Now. Melinda looked at Dr. Henry and Celia, seeking some support, but found only stern gazes. She realized she had lost. She tried one last card. If I leave, I'll tell everyone that you're a negligent father, that you abandoned your son, that you left him in the care of an incompetent employee. I'll destroy your reputation. Edward stepped forward, looking directly into her eyes. Do what you want. I don't care about reputation. I care about my son, and you will never come near him again. Melinda clutched her purse tightly, her fingers white with tension. You're an idiot, Edward. You could have had everything, a perfect family, but you chose to believe a manipulative boy and a gossiping employee. Get out, Edward repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Melinda tossed her hair back and walked towards the door. She stopped at the threshold and looked back one last time. When you realize you made a mistake, don't come looking for me. I won't, Edward assured her. Melinda left, slamming the door. The sound echoed through the house like thunder. Edward stood still in the middle of the living room, breathing heavily, trying to process everything that had happened. Celia and Dr. Henry remained silent, giving him the space he needed. After a few minutes, Edward collapsed onto the sofa, covering his face with his hands. "How did I let this happen? How did I not notice?" Dr. Henry sat beside him. "Edward, emotional abusers are experts at manipulation. They know exactly how to present a perfect public face while destroying their victims in private. You are not the first father to be deceived, and unfortunately you won't be the last. But I should have seen, I should have listened to Celia, I should have listened to my own son." Celia approached and placed her hand on his shoulder. "The important thing is that you saw it now, and now you can start to fix things." Edward lifted his face, his eyes red. "Does he forgive me? Does Michael forgive me?" Dr. Henry smiled slightly. "Children are incredibly generous when it comes to forgiveness, but you will need to rebuild his trust, and that takes time." Edward nodded, determined. "I will do everything necessary. I will be present, I will listen, I will protect." At that moment they heard light footsteps on the stairs. It was Michael, descending slowly, holding the handrail. He stopped halfway down the stairs, looking into the living room. "Dad?" Edward immediately stood up and went to him. "Michael, what are you doing awake?" I heard loud voices. I was scared. Edward knelt before his son, meeting his eyes. "You don't need to be afraid anymore. Melinda is gone." Michael's eyes widened. "She is. Forever." "Forever," Edward confirmed. "And she will never hurt you again." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "Really, Dad? Really?" Edward pulled his son into a tight hug. Michael hesitated for a second, as if still expecting to be rejected, but then relaxed and began to cry on his father's shoulder. Deep, pent-up sobs, the kind that bring both relief and pain at the same time. "Sorry, Dad. Sorry for not telling you sooner." "You have nothing to apologize for, son. Nothing. I'm the one who needs to apologize. For not seeing. For not protecting you." They remained embraced for a long time, while Celia and Dr. Henry watched in silence, knowing that this was just the beginning of a long healing process. When they finally separated, Edward picked up his son, even knowing the boy was already too big for it, and carried him back to his room. He helped him lie down, covered him with the sheet, and sat on the edge of the bed. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "You can ask anything you want." "Are you going to stay with me now, or are you going to travel again?" Edward felt his heart clench. "I'm going to stay. I'm going to reorganize my life to be more present. You are more important than any meeting, any business, anything." Michael smiled for the first time in weeks, a small, shy, but all shy, genuine smile. "Promise?" "I promise." The boy closed his eyes, finally relaxing. Edward stayed there, holding his hand, until his breathing became slow and regular, a sign that he had fallen asleep. When he went back down to the living room, he found Dr. Henry still there, talking with Celia. "Edward, I'm going to prescribe psychological support for Michael," the doctor said. "He will need therapy to process everything that happened, and I recommend that you also undergo therapy, both individual and with him. I will do everything necessary. I also need to schedule frequent appointments to monitor his weight. And eating. Food insecurity is serious and can have long-term consequences. You can schedule whatever you need. I'll be available." Dr. Henry stood up and shook Edward's hand. "You did the right thing today. I know it wasn't easy, but it was right. Thank you, Henry, for everything, for not giving up on opening my eyes." After the doctor left, Edward was alone with Celia in the living room. The employee was collecting the coffee cups that had been served during the confrontation. "Celia, I owe you an apology. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen." She paused and looked at him. "The important thing is that you listened when you needed to listen. Even so, you saved my son. I will never forget that." Celia smiled, her eyes moist. "I love that boy, as if he were my own, Mr. Anderson. I just did what anyone who loves would do. No, you did much more. You fought when no one believed, you didn't give up, and for that, I am eternally grateful." That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He lay awake in bed, thinking about everything that had happened in recent months, the times he ignored the signs, The times he chose to believe the illusion instead of reality. The times he prioritized his own convenience instead of his son's safety. But he also thought about the future, about how it would be different, about how he would be present, would listen, would protect, about how he would rebuild the trust that had been broken. Because now, finally, the truth was exposed. The mask had fallen, and although the road ahead was long and difficult, at least now they were walking together, in the right direction. And that, Edward thought before finally falling asleep, was already a start. The first rays of sun entered through the mansion windows when Michael woke up that Saturday morning. For the first time in months, he didn't feel the tightness in his chest that usually accompanied him upon opening his eyes. He didn't feel afraid to leave his room. He didn't feel the need to make himself invisible. Melinda had left, and with her, the weight that crushed the boy's heart. Edward was in the kitchen when Michael came down, still in his pajamas, dragging his legs slightly. His father, who also hadn't slept well, turned upon hearing the footsteps and smiled. "Good morning, son. Did you sleep well?" Michael nodded, still shy. "I did." "Are you hungry?" The simple question made Michael hesitate. For so long, food had been used as a weapon, as punishment, as control. Now the question brought back painful memories. Edward noticed the hesitation and approached, kneeling to be at his son's eye level. "Michael, from now on, you will never have to be afraid to eat again. Never again. Food is meant to make you well, not to hurt you. Do you understand?" The boy nodded again, his eyes beginning to shine. "I understand, Dad." "Then, come, let's make pancakes together, the ones you like with chocolate." They spent the morning in the kitchen laughing, messing up the recipe, making a mess. Celia watched from the doorway, her heart warmed, seeing father and son rebuilding bonds that had been shaken. When they finally sat down to eat, Michael managed to finish 2 whole pancakes, small but whole. Edward celebrated as if it were the greatest achievement in the world. And, in a way, it was. In the following days, the house routine changed completely. Edward cancelled trips, rescheduled meetings, delegated responsibilities. For the first time in years, he prioritized being present. He took Michael to school, picked him up in the late afternoon, helped with homework, and talked about his day. Dr. Henry scheduled weekly sessions with a child psychologist specializing in trauma. Dr. Patricia Miller was a 40-year-old woman with curly hair pulled back into a ponytail, a calm voice and kind eyes. She began working with Michael gradually, using drawings, games, and conversations to help him process everything he had experienced. In the first sessions, Michael barely spoke, he only drew. Small figures, dark colors, nervous strokes. But with time, the colors became more vibrant. The figures larger, and words began to flow. In one of the sessions, about 3 weeks after Melinda's expulsion, Michael finally managed to verbalize what he felt. "I thought it was my fault," he said, looking at the drawing he was making. "I thought if I were better, less annoying, less difficult, she would like me." Dr. Patricia gently shook her head. "Michael, you were never the problem. The problem was with her. People who hurt children have their own problems, which have nothing to do with you. But she said it was my fault. She was wrong. Very wrong. And now you are safe. You are surrounded by people who truly love you." Michael looked at the drawing. This time he had drawn a house, and inside the house, 3 figures, a tall man, a child, and a woman in an apron. Him, his father, and Celia. "It's my family," Michael said, pointing to the drawing. "It's a beautiful family," the psychologist replied, smiling. Parallel to the therapy sessions, Dr. Henry closely monitored Michael's physical recovery. The boy had lost 4 kilograms during the months of abuse, an alarming number for a child his age. The nutritionist, Dr. Fiona Collins, developed a careful eating plan that respected the food-related traumas. No pressure, no obligation, just gentle offering in small portions several times a day. Edward learned to cook dishes Michael liked. Celia prepared colorful and fun snacks. Gradually, the boy began to relearn that food could be pleasure, not punishment. There were difficult days. Days when Michael woke up with nightmares, screaming, calling for Celia. Days when he refused to eat because the fear returned, stealthy, whispering that he would be punished. Days when he cried for no apparent reason, simply releasing accumulated pain. In those moments, Edward was there. He held his son's hand, waited for the crying to pass, repeated as many times as necessary that he was safe, that he was loved, that nothing bad would happen. The school was also informed about the situation. The pedagogical coordinator, teachers, and assistants received guidance on how to deal with Michael, how to identify signs of relapse, and how to offer support without pressure. Michael's teacher, Mrs. Regina, an elderly lady with grey hair and a welcoming smile, began to dedicate special attention to the boy. She sat beside him during activities, praised every small progress, and encouraged him to participate without forcing. "Michael, would you like to read this paragraph to the class?" she would ask, always giving him the option to refuse. At first, Michael always refused, but one day, about 2 months after Melinda's departure, he timidly raised his hand. "I want to read, teacher." The classroom fell silent. His classmates, who had learned to respect Michael's pace, waited patiently. And he read, with a trembling voice at first, but it gained firmness with each word. When he finished, the entire class applauded. Michael smiled, a huge smile that lit up his whole face. That night, he excitedly told his father, and Edward hugged him tightly, his eyes full of pride. Meanwhile, in physical therapy, something extraordinary was happening. Fabian, the physiotherapist who had been working with Michael for years, noticed that the boy was more willing, more confident. The exercises that once seemed impossible were now approached with determination. "Michael, let's try to take a few steps with your crutches today," Fabian suggested on a Thursday afternoon. Michael, who had emotionally blocked any attempt to walk in recent months, hesitated. He looked at Edward, who was sitting in a chair nearby, and then at Celia, who accompanied him. "You can do it, my dear," Celia encouraged. "We're here." Michael took a deep breath and nodded. Fabian helped him position himself, adjusted the crutches, gave instructions, and then slowly, his body trembling with effort and nervousness, Michael took the first step, then the second, then the third. When he reached the fifth, his legs faltered, and Fabian held him. But instead of breaking down in tears of frustration, as he used to, Michael laughed. A light, relieved laugh. "I did it, Dad. Did you see?" Edward was crying, but with joy. "I saw, son, I saw." Celia also cried, discreetly wiping away tears with the corner of her apron. That was a milestone. From then on, Michael began to walk more and more, with more confidence, with more will. The muscles that had atrophied during the months of stress began to strengthen again. The sparkle returned to his eyes. The smile returned to his face. About 3 months after Melinda's expulsion, the family had already found a new rhythm. Edward worked from home 3 times a week to be more present. He took Michael for walks in the park on weekends. They played video games together. They read stories before bedtime. Celia, who was previously just an employee, was now officially recognized as part of the family. Edward increased her salary, not as payment for saving Michael, but as recognition of the essential role she played. "She's my second mother," Michael once said, and Celia had to leave the room to cry with emotion. But not everything was linear. There were moments of relapse. One Sunday afternoon, while walking through Hyde Park, Michael saw a blonde woman in the distance with her back turned and froze. His entire body became rigid. His breathing quickened. "Dad, is it her?" Edward looked and saw it wasn't Melinda. It was just a stranger. He knelt down and held his son's shoulders. "It's not her, son, and even if it were, she can't hurt you anymore. I'm here. Celia is here. You are protected." Michael needed a few minutes to calm down, but he managed, and they continued their walk, although the boy held his father's hand more tightly than before. Dr. Patricia explained that these triggers were normal, that Michael's brain had been trained to associate certain stimuli with danger, and that unlearning this would take time. But with patience, love, and consistency, he would get there. and he did. 6 months after Melinda's expulsion, Michael was unrecognizable. He had regained the lost weight. He walked with crutches throughout the entire house, sometimes even going out into the garden. He actively participated in classes. He made friends with 2 classmates, Brandon and Luke, who frequently came to play at the mansion. One Saturday afternoon, as the 3 boys played in the garden, Edward and Celia watched from the veranda. "He's so different," Edward commented, his voice laden with emotion. "He seems like a different child." "He's the same child," Celia corrected. "Only now he can be who he always was, without fear." Edward nodded, his eyes moist. "Thank you, Celia, for never giving up on him." "I would never give up, Mr. Anderson. Never." There was, however, one last threat. About 8 months after the expulsion, Melinda tried to return. She appeared at the mansion gate on a rainy April afternoon, asking to speak with Edward. Celia, who answered the intercom, refused immediately. "You are not welcome here." "I just want to talk, to apologize. There's nothing to talk about. Mr. Anderson made it clear that—" "You cannot approach," Melinda insisted. But Celia was firm. When she realized she couldn't get in, Melinda began sending messages, long texts, sometimes asking for forgiveness, sometimes making veiled threats, sometimes trying to emotionally manipulate Edward. Edward, advised by Dr. Henry and a lawyer, requested a protective order. The judge, after reviewing all the evidence of emotional abuse, granted the order. Melinda was prohibited from approaching Edward, Michael, or their residence within 200 meters. When Michael found out for the first time, he verbalized what he felt. "I'm afraid she'll come back, Dad." "She won't come back. The law doesn't allow it, and if she tries, there will be consequences. But what if she tries anyway?" Edward picked up his son, something he did less and less due to the boy's weight, but still did in important moments. "Michael, I promise you, I will never let anyone hurt you again, never again. You are my priority, my only priority." Michael hugged his father tightly. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. More than anything." The months continued to pass. Michael turned 9 on a birthday full of joy, with a garden party, chocolate cake, friends, laughter. Edward hired a clown. They set up an inflatable pool and played until sunset. When the party ended and the guests left, Michael was exhausted but radiant. "Best birthday of my life," he said, before falling asleep on the sofa, his head in Celia's lap. Edward covered his son with a light blanket and sat beside Celia. "A year ago, I almost lost him." "But you didn't," Celia replied. "He's here, and he's well. Thanks to you." "Thanks to all of us," she corrected. "You, me, Dr. Henry, Dr. Patricia, the school. We all did our part." Edward nodded, looking at his sleeping son. "It's true, but you were the one who started it, who refused to close your eyes, who fought when I was too cowardly to fight. You weren't cowardly, you were just blind, but you learned to see. I learned, and I will never stop seeing again." Another year passed. Michael was 10 years old, strong, confident, happy. He continued therapy, but now the sessions were bi-weekly, no longer weekly. He walked long distances with his crutches, participated in all school activities, and had a close group of friends. The relationship with Edward was stronger than ever. Father and son had learned to talk, to share feelings, to trust each other. Edward never again prioritized work over family, never again ignored signs, never again closed his eyes to what truly mattered. Celia remained there, an unwavering pillar, loving that boy as if he were her own blood. And Michael, who never forgot what she had done for him, always said that when he grew up he wanted to be like her, someone who protects others, someone who doesn't give up. One Sunday afternoon, 2 years after Melinda's expulsion, the 3 were in the garden. Edward and Michael played ball while Celia read a book under the shade of a tree. The sun shone, birds sang, the breeze was gentle. Michael, sweaty and happy, stopped playing and looked at his father. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "You can." "Do you still think about her? About Melinda?" Edward hesitated, thinking about the best way to answer. Sometimes, but not with longing, I think about what could have happened if I hadn't woken up in time, and I'm grateful that I did. I'm grateful too. And you, son? Do you still think about her? Sometimes I have nightmares, but they're becoming rarer. Dr. Patricia said that one day they will stop completely. And they will, because you are safe now, and you will remain safe. Michael smiled and went back to playing ball. Edward watched his son, his heart full of love and gratitude. Gratitude for having woken up before it was too late. Gratitude for having people like Celia and Dr. Henry by his side. Gratitude for having been given a second chance, because not everyone gets a second chance. And he knew that. That white mansion, which was once a golden prison, was now a true home. Full of laughter, conversations, hugs, full of life. And Michael, who was once silenced, now spoke freely. Who once feared eating, now ate with pleasure. Who once felt like a burden, now knew he was loved. The healing wasn't quick, it wasn't easy, but it was real and lasting. Because in the end, what saved Michael wasn't just the expulsion of evil, it was the constant presence of love, of care, of protection, of the people who refused to close their eyes to his suffering. And the promise that echoed in that house every day was clear: never again ignore signs. Never again doubt the child. Never again allow silence to hide a plea for help. Because a child deserves to be heard, deserves to be protected, deserves to be loved. Always. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Michael, Edward, and Celia has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what moment marked you the most in this story. Every day we bring intense narratives like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul. Stories about family, forgiveness, rebuilding, and true love. Your presence and support make all the difference for us to continue sharing these stories that make us reflect on the importance of protecting those we love. We await you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions. Until then, take good care of those you love and never ignore the signs of those who need help.